Hello and welcome to What It Takes. I'm Tom Landon. Today's show is on a topic that is dear to the hearts of all of us at Blue Ridge PBS, storytelling. My guest is Lee Hunsaker, who in addition to being the person who brought the Hoot and Holler storytelling events to our region, has also worked in the film industry. She's also been a writing coach and, much to her own surprise, a public speaker herself. She's a cancer survivor who grew up in Roanoke, moved away, and then returned with her husband Jonathan to raise her own family and to be close to her own very interesting clan. Lee, welcome to What It Takes.
Thanks so much, Tom. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you here. And I have to issue a disclaimer right off the bat that you and I go way back, and I've known you for a long time, and so happy to have you here. And I have told stories at your events, so I'm not an impartial person here. I love everything you do. I always like to start with just a little background for people who don't know you. You've got an interesting backstory. You grew up in Roanoke, and take it from there. Like, how did you get back here after leaving?
Yes, that's a great question. It's a crooked road, shall we say. Let's see. I left here in college and moved to Austin, Texas, where I was sort of immediately ushered into the film industry doing costumes. Had a 20-year career in Austin, costumes and listening to live music and soaking up that culture. And Austin started growing and kind of getting too big for its britches, as they say. And in 2008, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that was kind of a wake-up call for me, and realized I was really missing the mountains and missing my family here. And it just kind of called me home. And I never really thought I would be back here, but I sure am happy that I listened.
And your family has really long roots in far southwest Virginia, Richlands area, and your mom owned and ran the Grandin Theater, your uncle, all these just great connections with here. So we're glad you did decide to come back. When you think about Austin getting cool, right?
Yeah.
You went before it was the whatever capital of the world it is now. What did you notice about Austin that made it not as great a place for you to live?
Well, they started kind of tearing down the wonderful independent, music venues. Starbucks was popping up on every corner. The cost of living started going up, 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 up. They were knocking down the wonderful houses that made it funky and groovy, and just kind of slowly started driving out, the artists and the musicians that made it the town that it was. And so just with that change, the traffic, it just started to lose its charm, and it made me sad.
And when you came back to Roanoke, did you see our community with new eyes? Did you see potential? In 2008, there were things going on here.
Right, yes. I actually ended up here in about 2011, so I eked out a couple more years. And absolutely, it was not the same town that I grew up in. Everything felt full of possibility, wide open minds, super cool venues. I loved the feeling of the neighborhoods again. I guess coming back as a grown-up, I did just have new eyes, and I loved the idea of raising my son here, and just was immediately embraced right away with the community. So it was nice to have roots already, for sure.
Yeah, and I think there is, they say you can't go home again, but sometimes you can, right?
Yes.
You recently spoke at an event for female entrepreneurs, and you wrote a great response to that after it was over, but you are an entrepreneur now. Have you ever thought of yourself in that way?
Absolutely not. I guess my terminology for myself is dreamer, or a kind of a connector. I would make a great producer. I love bringing people together. I'm a matchmaker. In many ways, artists coming together as community, writers coming together, storytellers, and I love putting like-minded people together who may not know each other or who may not realize they have a connection, and making that happen. So definitely a dreamer, never used the word entrepreneur, but I'm settling into that definition now.
Well, I think it fits. There's all kinds of entrepreneurs,
yes.
right? There's those who are very driven financially, and those who just want to start something, which I think is what an entrepreneur does, opens doors. You I wasn't here when you were, before you left. I met you after you came back, but, or we overlapped, but you were much younger than I am. So your mom ran the Grandin Theater. What was it like sort of growing up in that world?
Absolute magic. I use the word magic a lot, probably overuse it, but if there was ever a time to use that word, it was then. She went into that space that was already wonderful and beautiful, but it was crumbling. And she took her vision and her entrepreneurship and her decorating skills and brought that glorious space back to life. She poured blood, sweat, and tears. We ate popcorn 3 meals a day for many years. My whole family worked there behind the concession stand. So it is very much a part of my family's heart and mine especially.
And we'll talk a little bit about you bringing programming back to the Grandin in a minute, but the idea of Hoot and Holler, first of all, explain what it is, and then tell me how did that, it's not a completely original idea,
Sure.
It was original to Roanoke, but how did that come about?
Yeah, I am an English major, so my love has always been creative writing and stories. And of course, hobnobbing around in the film business and reading scripts and watching, life come alive, off the page, has been part of what I've done forever. And so when I got back to Roanoke, I was sort of in an identity crisis. I'm not a costume designer for film anymore. What am I going to be? And so I started just inviting people who I love to come write in my living room. And little by little, that started spreading and turned into going more out in public and people really responding, really being hungry for that connection with each other. And so realizing that Roanoke really didn't have a live storytelling scene, I came up with the name Hoot and Holler, which is, kind of a salute to our area and the mountains, and a little bit tongue-in-cheek because I always wanted to have a feeling of fun and kind of a party, storytelling party, and put the idea out there. Approached my friends at Sweet Donkey Coffee and I said, can we try this? And they were all for it. Created an event page and an invite and had 12 storytellers within 24 hours who were ready to tell. And the rest is literally history. It just, each time it grew and more people started feeling brave enough to try to tell stories, and it's just been a dream.
So describe I know there are different kinds of Hoot and Hollers, but describe kind of what a typical one consists of.
Yeah, so basically we are, the Roanoke version of the moth. So we, being Hoot and Holler, will present a theme, a very wide open to interpretation theme. And then we invite people to write stories, submit their stories in writing first. And then if I feel like it's a good fit, we'll do a phone call and work with each storyteller very closely to edit their story, to bring out the very best parts of their story so that they feel they're telling their story authentically. So I'm kind of the director, curator, handholder, mama bear.
You've been referred to as a storytelling midwife,
Right.
which I think is appropriate. A lot of you've worked in movies and theater and worked with some really great directors and storytellers. Are there things you learned prior to, and through your English degree, but are there some things you learned that, like, when somebody approaches you and says, I think I've got a good story, that you can use to decide, is this a good story and how might it be told?
Absolutely, yes. My skills are definitely getting sharpened, as I go along here. I look for, if a person has a good sense of a beginning, middle, and an end, like basic storytelling 101, where is the arc? Where is this going? Where is the person going to drop the audience in? Because there's always a backstory, and how much do we need to know before we get to the pinnacle? And so, through my writing skills, an English major, I can understand how a story is structured, and I'm always looking to see if the storyteller understands that. And they don't always, but there is often a story in there that I know I can help them birth, if you will.
Sure. Well, and I've been a part of this, so I've got an insider's look at it, and it is really interesting. You bring the storytellers together, I don't know, maybe a week or less before the event, and everybody tells their story. Some really married to a script,
Right.
some not. What is, you don't have a lot of time to rehearse. It's not a professional event where you're paying these people. What is that process like for you, and what are you trying to do in that rehearsal time?
Yeah, well, there leading up to the rehearsal, there have been multiple messages, phone calls, meet for coffee, meet for beer. People try to quit because they're having a panic attack. There's lots of behind the scenes kind of psychology and loving that goes on before we make it to that rehearsal, and I'm always holding my breath on the day of rehearsal for people, to have those kind of last minute nerves. But that rehearsal for me is when I can really envision the event happening, when all of those personalities get together in the same room, when everybody gets to hear each other's stories and see how their voice is going to fit into the night. It's so exciting. It's electric.
And sometimes the stories change a lot, right?
Absolutely.
And with input from other people who are also telling stories.
Yeah, it's kind of like the best of like a college, creative writing class where we're sitting around, we're snacking, we're having, coffee and beer and hanging out, and we give each other beautiful feedback, and it's only us. And so it feels like a real family, as you know. And yeah, sometimes the feedback will send the story in a different direction. That's why I try to do it a few days in advance to give time for those edits and changes.
And you seem to assemble a mix. You've got sort of some standbys people. I don't know if I'm one of those or not, but like I can, if I have an idea, I'll call and let you know. But then you always have several people who have never done anything like this before. Right. And with those new tellers, I really think a lot of it is sort of psychology and hand-holding, but what are some common things that, when somebody has a story to tell but isn't sure how to do it, that you really coax them with?
Yeah, I make them get, I'm starting to push people even harder now that I'm feeling more confident in my role as the midwife. I'm literally, having them dig a little deeper. Where's the emotion here? How do you want the audience to feel? I go through a whole kind of questionnaire with them on how they themselves want to feel, first of all. What is important about them sharing this story in front of 300 strangers? What compels you to want to do this? And then from there, how do you want everyone to feel when you step off that stage? What do you want to leave us with? And so that's how I kind of guide them, and so sometimes there's extraneous stuff that can go and tighten up and make the story even more impactful. So
what are you trying to go for in terms of length for your stories?
10-minute max is my rule, which has been broken a time or two, or 40. But I really, that seems to be the magic number for audience sort of attention span. I try to have 6 to 8 storytellers per event, and so that gets everybody out, before midnight with an intermission so that everyone can mingle, and it just is kind of a magic number, really for everybody.
I'm going to read something, and for apologies to the audience for me talking here, but you wrote something the other day, and I pulled a little segment out of it. And it is about your process. So you wrote, part of my process of working with storytellers is urging them to be their most authentic selves, the good, the bad, and the ugly, for them to show us the parts that are buried away, pushed down, just out of sight for the rest of the world to see. My goal is to help people bring those stories into the light, to illuminate the fact that through our differences we are still human beings doing the best we can, and that we are more alike than we realize. And sometimes we fail. And more than that, from my perspective, mostly we shine if we're just given the opportunity to be seen. That's beautiful, first of all. But second of all, that idea that we might fail. Yeah. And sometimes it goes off the rails a little bit, right? What does the audience tend to be like in that moment when everybody realizes, this might not be going the way it was rehearsed?
That sort of audible inhale, that you can hear in the audience. But our audiences, and I think you will attest to this, are the most loving, supportive. They are there to listen. You can hear a pin drop in these events. They are leaned in and they are ready to support and hold. With the knowledge that these are average people. These aren't performers, you know, not everyone is an amazing writer, but they're speaking from their heart. And I think the audience recognizes that, and that's how we all kind of roll with that together and try to keep it, you know, in the road as best we can.
I should say too that for our viewers that if you're curious about this, you've never heard about Hoot and Holler, you can find several examples of Hoot and Holler on the Echo channel here at Blue Ridge PBS, where we've aired these and we've shared them as individual stories. So encourage you to go to the website and look for that. How do you come up with your themes?
Oh my gosh, I'm pulling over the car. You know, they come to me, I'll hear something that will spark an idea. You know, I've got a notepad running in the car, at the grocery store, in conversation with people. They just kind of come to me. And I never really know what's going to come up next until something bubbles to the top. There's usually, maybe it's a current event that feels like it's a good fit, or a holiday. But mostly it's really just, I try to schedule them so that the tones are different each time, you know, where we know one's going to be pretty hilarious, one might be a little more serious. So just to ride all of those waves and keep them, each one really different from the next.
And in addition to the ones that you do, like at the Granite Theater and other places, you've started in the last few years to partner with some nonprofits to help their constituents, I guess,
right.
Tell their stories. Tell me a little bit about that.
That has been one of the most rewarding parts for me, working with, you know, victims of sexual violence, with foster families, with the homeless community. So yeah, working with people like TAP, with Sarah, with United Way, for maybe a smaller, more specialized events, to help some of their clients share stories so that the people know where their checks are going, you know, really put those stories in front of them. Yes, it's easy to read in a newsletter, but when you see an actual human being sharing right there in front of you, it's incredibly impactful. So.
And I've been to a couple of those events, both as a teller and as an audience member. You touched on it a little bit, but you know, what is it about telling a story from somebody's own perspective, personal experience, that does do more than statistics or that newsletter?
Yes, I think that's really the whole point of Hoot and Holler in general, is coming together in a common space, in the same room, in the same theater, and really being together. You know, virtual was real hard. I couldn't do it. There's something about the give and take between a teller and a listener, and that exchange of energy that is that's very alive. And so I think it's everything to hear the story in person.
And to step away from Hoot and Holler for just a second, I know that you also do things like host writing groups and some creative writing things. How did that, was that first? Was that second? It sounds like that came first almost.
It was first.
You were doing that first.
Yeah, it was first for sure. And then it was just such a logical kind of next step to then bring them out into the light. Yeah.
You always have music as part of your shows. Yes. What is the role of music in your storytelling events?
I think for me, and I assume for everyone else, there's almost like a soundtrack to our lives when we think about it. You know, we're not always aware, but when you're kind of given the prompt to think of a song that might go along with your story, or about this time in your life that you're sharing about, it gives it one more level of really cool depth, I think. So I have each storyteller choose a theme song and step out on stage with their song playing, and it just kind of sets the tone for the story. It sets us in a place and a time. And it's just kind of it's just another layer, I think, that adds to the show part of it, I guess.
Sure, it's a
yeah.
little theme song, Time the Pump,
yeah.
and people do know, like, oh, where, and then sometimes it's fun to listen to the story to see, like, why did they pick that song?
Right.
And then as the farther it gets
right.
into it, you know it.
Right.
I think for many of your storytellers, it has really changed their own perspective of themselves. Have you noticed that? Are any examples come to mind where you think, this is a point of departure for this person?
Countless. I can't even count how many people I've seen transformed, truly transformed by sharing their story. Even if it's a funny story, it doesn't have to be a heart-wrenching, hard, difficult story to share, but sometimes people who had no confidence at all, but they know that story is in there, so they respond to the theme. And once they really step up there and share, I mean, they'll come off shaking and crying, and they get stopped in town now. People will stop them at a restaurant or at the coffee shop and say, "I heard you, and your story affected me, and I remember it." And it's beautiful. It just reverberates out, in our city, out into the world. So
No, I think those words, "I heard you,"
yeah,
right?
I heard you.
We all want to be heard.
That's right.
Right? And to be given some guidance on how you can be heard is really helpful.
Right.
And I know that several of your folks have gone on, like just since I saw them do it the first time, they're now starting their own businesses and doing it. And they may have done those things anyway, but I think that Hoot was almost a jumping off point. You've had these events at many places. I know Sweet Donkey Coffee you mentioned.
Yes.
Parkway Brewing was one place. I think you've done them at some other places, and now many of them at the Grandin Theater, which has opened its doors to you. How does the venue kind of impact the vibe?
Very much, very, very much. We had a great run at 5 Points Music Sanctuary too. Some of them are designed to be listening rooms. Breweries can be a little more loosey-goosey. Floyd Fest is loosey-goosey. So they can just change the mood. Some of them kind of require or beg for more humor or a little, sassier, a little more late night. And then somewhere like the Grandin, there's like a reverence in that room just by the very nature of the place itself. And that's a real true listening room, and getting even more so as we speak. But
was it the first event you did at the Grandin? What was about the movies?
It was about the Grandin itself, which was just really
so that
special.
must have felt good to
Yes.
you, right? And your mother and Jean Lindsay, your grandmother, who was, not to make let's not get too teary, but
I know.
she was always front and center and loved that so much. This is a family affair for you. I know when he's able to be here, Jonathan is here.
Yes.
You've got a high school age son now, right, Dexter?
10th grader.
I've known since. Do you think that has this sort of enterprise infected your whole family a little bit?
I think it has. It really has. We're about to do a memorial for my grandmother coming up, and the whole family wants to pitch in, and we want to do stories about Jean Lindsay. So it's definitely it's reverberating. The ripples are there. So
yeah, she was a fantastic lady.
Yeah.
We've talked about just storytelling specifically for those in our audience who can't imagine. They're like, I would never do that.
Right.
How does being able to tell a story well, how else does that apply in our lives?
Oh yeah, I think it applies to business. What is the story of your business? What is the message that you're getting across? I think we've all kind of forgotten how to talk to each other. We text, we Facebook, but an actual face-to-face conversation where we can, express our emotions, express what really happened, and go a little bit deeper. I think it truly can break down walls and barriers between human beings who may not have understood each other before. And it can soften us and in trying to have more compassion. So I really see how it can fuel. I always say I think storytelling can save the world, and I still believe that very much.
Well, I think I think engineers could benefit from being able to tell a story. That whole idea is going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That could be really, really helpful.
Right.
We've got a few minutes left, and we're recording this in September of 2022. It will air sometime in October of 2022. By then, I think this event at GoFest will have already happened. But that's a case where you're taking it into a new venue. What will that be like?
Well, in my dream, it will be, kind of rowdy, and they're actually going to they're building a new stage for these kind of smaller acts. There's going to actually be campfires, and we're closing out the festival this year. So nobody really knows, but in my hope is that people who've never heard of Hoot and Holler, who would never think about telling a story live, will stop by the stage, stay for a minute and listen, and maybe be inspired to share the next time. So
Great. Last question, how do people follow what's going on with Hoot and Holler?
yes, Facebook is the best way. Hoot and Holler Stories, Facebook. And through Messenger there, the messages will come straight to me. If you have an idea.
Not your support staff.
Right, not my employees.
All right. Well, sadly, that is all the time we have for this public conversation. Luckily for me, I'll be able to continue it at one of Lee's events or sitting around the back table at the Community Inn here in Roanoke. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.